Yesterday at the Supreme Court, there was a hearing in a case called U.S. versus Skrmetti. This particular case is one the Daily Wire has a bit of a stake in because obviously Matt Walsh of the Daily Wire has done heavy lifting in what is a woman, particularly in the state of Tennessee, with regard to preventing the transing of the children in the state of Tennessee. So Tennessee passed a state law that banned the transing of the kids. And then a federal lawsuit was filed by the ACLU in an attempt to suggest that there is, in fact, a 14th Amendment argument that small children must be given cross-sex hormones or this is sex discrimination. That is the argument that was being made yesterday in U.S. versus Skrmetti. The U.S. Solicitor General under Joe Biden, who is trying to argue in favor of striking down the Tennessee law, they argued the Tennessee law discriminates by sex and transgender status, violating the equal protection of the laws. The feds argue, quote, a teenager whose sex assigned at birth is male can be prescribed testosterone to conform to a male gender identity, but a teenager assigned female at birth cannot. That is a wild argument. Again, it has nothing to, that is sort of like suggesting that it is sex discrimination to suggest that if a male has cancer of the prostate, he can have his prostate removed, but a female who has anal cancer can't have her prostate removed because she doesn't have a prostate. These are, what are you talking about? These are different diagnoses for different conditions. It's an absurdity. Now, again, a lot of this confusion was created by the terrible ruling in Bostock in 2020, which suggested that the Civil Rights Act, when it banned employment discrimination by sex, that also included discrimination based on the idea that if a boy walks in and says he's a girl, that you could fire him based on that. But somehow that's what the Civil Rights Act was meant to protect against. That, of course, is incredibly silly. But what is this in the end? What is this entire argument about? It's about a power game. It's about a power game in a couple of ways. One, the left doesn't believe that men can become women. They don't. They're lying if they say they do. No one believes this. No one. Even the greatest advocates don't believe this. Instead, it is a power game. It is designed to get you to say the thing. You will be made to care. You will be made to repeat the phraseology. And this is not a right to privacy. This is a right to publicity issue. It's a right to be treated in a way that you believe everyone else should treat you, even if it violates those other people's rights. That's what this is all about. And even violating the rights of minors. It's a power game. Chase Strangio, who that is the name of the transgender man, meaning a woman, who works for the ACLU and was the attorney on behalf of the ACLU before the Supreme Court, is making this argument. Again, it is amazing. This is what we have come to in America. We have to have Supreme Court arguments over whether the state should be able to prohibit the genital mutilation and hormonal destruction of children. Here's Chase Strangio. Again, this person is a lawyer before the Supreme Court, defending sex changes for 2-year-olds.
Nobody has to provide this medication to adolescents. These are not doctors being forced to provide this medication. These are doctors who are wanting to treat their patients in the best way that they know how, based on the best available evidence to us. And these are young people who may have known since they were 2 years old exactly who they are, who suffered for 6-7 years before they had any relief. And what's happening here, it's not the kids who are consenting to this treatment, it's the parents who are consenting to the treatment. And as a parent, I would say, when our children are suffering, we are suffering. And these are parents who love their children, who are listening to the advice of their doctors, of the mainstream medical community, and doing what's right for their kids, and the state of Tennessee has displaced their judgment.
Some of the Supreme Court justices were having nothing to do with this yesterday. The audio is available from Supreme Court hearings, but the video is not. That's just the way that it works over there. Justice Samuel Alito asked some pretty basic questions that destroyed the government's case. He asked, for example, about whether sex changes reduce suicide, because the data show that they do not, actually, which is the chief argument that has been used by the state as well as by trans advocates to argue for why children should be given these sorts of horrific, barbaric treatments. So he says, well, where's the data that shows that these treatments actually reduce suicidal ideation? And the answer is there are none.
On page 195 of the Cass report, it says, there is no evidence that gender affirmative treatments reduce suicide.
What I think that is referring to is there is no evidence in the studies that this treatment reduces completed suicide. And the reason for that is completed suicide, thankfully and admittedly, is rare, and we're talking about a very small population of individuals with studies that don't necessarily have completed suicides within them. However, there are multiple studies, long-term longitudinal studies that do show that there is a reduction in suicidality, which I think is a positive outcome to this treatment.
Okay, so that would be a distinction without much of a difference there from Chase Strangio and trying to split hairs. The reality is that the data don't exist on this point at all. Alito then went further and fully destroyed the entire logic. He pointed out that the 14th Amendment is meant to prevent discrimination on the basis of immutable characteristic. Immutable characteristic would be like race. You can't, if you're a black person, you can't become a white person. You're still going to be black no matter how many times you say you're white. He says, well, when it comes to gender, that's clearly not an immutable characteristic under the 14th Amendment.
Are there individuals who are born male, assigned male at birth, who at one point identify as female, but then later come to identify as male, and likewise for individuals who are assigned female at birth, at some point identify as female, identify as male, but later come to identify as female? Are there not such people?
There are such people. I agree with that, Justice.
So it's not an immutable characteristic, is it?
Well, duh. Of course it's not an immutable characteristic, but this argument was never about the principle of the matter. Ever. It's all about a power game in which the entire body politic, and in fact all of humanity, is forced to abide by a false construction of reality because that's what the left wants. The left wishes that humanity were all a bunch of interchangeable widgets that they could mold at will. And if that's not true, we'll just pretend that it's true, and we will mutilate kids in order to accomplish this. That is the logic of the left on these issues. I mean, Sotomayor, who is by far the dumbest person on the Supreme Court of the United States. There's some other candidates, but Sotomayor is unique in her level of stupidity on the Supreme Court. Yesterday, she compared the hormonal treatment of teenagers and pre-teenagers to them having aspirin.
They cannot eliminate the risk of detransitioners, so it becomes a pure exercise of weighing benefits versus risk. And the question of how many minors have to have their bodies irreparably harmed for unproven benefits is one that is best left.
I'm sorry, Counselor. Every medical treatment has a risk, even taking aspirin. There is always going to be a percentage of the population under any medical treatment that's going to suffer a harm.
Okay, so you're now comparing, Sonia Sotomayor, taking aspirin to having your genitals chopped off as a 15-year-old, your breasts chopped off. Well, she's neither a good doctor nor a good lawyer. Are you tired of the lies and the twist of the mainstream media talking points? Yeah, me too. Join me in my newest series, Fact, where I dismantle and bring truth to this tiring mainstream agenda.